Masechet Zevaḥim, Daf Samech Bet. We were just discussing how when the Jewish people came back to Yerushalayim at the beginning of the second Bet HaMikdash period, and they rebuilt the Bet HaMikdash, they also increased the size of the Mizbeach. And so now more about the rebuilding of the Mizbeach in the second Bet HaMikdash. Bishlam habayit min kerasurato, ela Mizbeach mena yad'eh. We understand how the house itself, the Bet HaMikdash, how did they know where it was and the size and dimensions and exactly where to rebuild it? Well, that they can tell from the foundations. When a building is destroyed, you can come back. Archaeologists can go back to cities thousands of years later, and they can find the foundations of a wall, and then you know exactly where the wall is, and so you can rebuild it. However, the Mizbeach itself, how will they know where it is? When they came back, how did they know exactly where to place it? Amar bi El-Azar, Ra'u Mizbeach banoi Michael, Asar HaGadol, Omed Makriv Alav. We're going to have 3 or 4 different answers. The first one is that they saw, like in a vision, the Mizbeach built and Michael, the great angel, was standing above it and giving sacrifices. So they saw a prophetic vision that showed them where to rebuild the Mizbeach. The second answer is that they saw the ashes of Isaac. Now, actually, of course, Yitzchak was not actually killed and burned in Akedat Yitzchak, but rather only symbolically through the ayil. So maybe this means that they saw the ashes of the ayil. Now they wouldn't have seen the ashes so many years later either. But again, this is also symbolic and with a vision. But each of these visions mean different symbols. The one from the angel seems to mean that there's a parallel Yerushalayim and Bet HaMikdash up in heaven. So we're thinking of the Bet HaMikdash as a conduit from heaven down to earth, and this one might be a conduit to back to history. And the Berit and Abraham's actions and Yitzchak, the forefathers. Anyway, so they saw that was placed in exactly where the Mizbeach was, and that's how they knew, because Akedat Yitzchak and the Midrash was also at the place of Harabayit. Rabbi Shemuel bar Nachmani amar, Mikol habayit kolo herichu reach ketoret, misham herichu reach evarim. The third opinion is that there was a smell. This is also 70 years later, so it's not like it's the original smell, but this is, rather than a prophetic vision that they saw something, this would be a prophetic sense of smell, that there was a scent miraculously, and whenever they walked around, they would smell the ketoret, because the ketoret, that smell is very pervasive and goes all over. However, when they walked around and they got to the place where the Mizbeach should be, then they smelled the scent of burnt animal limbs. And that's how they knew, precisely here is the Mizbeach. According to Rambam, in fact, the purpose of the ketoret, at least one of the purposes, is to cover the smell of flesh. That's not such a nice smell, and so you have the ketoret instead. That's the reason for it. So here you could see, depending on where you're standing, you'll smell the flesh more right at that spot. So that's 3 answers, and now we have yet another one. Amar Abba bar Chana amar Rabbi Yochanan, Shelosha nevim alu mahem min hagola. Rabbi Yochanan teaches that there were 3 prophets that came from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. These were the last of the prophets, Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi, that we read about in those later books of Tanakh, and they were able to help them out with these things. Echad she'a'id lahem ala mizbeach. One of them testified through prophecy about the size and shape of the Mizbeach. We saw that yesterday. They weren't sure what's the maximum size they could make it. So one of the 3 prophets said about that. V'echad she'id lahem al mekom ha'mizbeach, and one of them testified and prophesied about the exact placement where to put the Mizbeach. And one of them testified that one can offer sacrifices even without a Bet HaMikdash. It took them a while to actually build a Bet HaMikdash because Cyrus said they can go back, but when they tried to rebuild the Bet HaMikdash, there were some locals that stopped them. Then they complained to the zoning board, the Persian zoning board, and gave them a hard time. and they were not able to build the Bet HaMikdash itself, but they could build a Mizbeach and start offering sacrifices even without the Bet HaMikdash, and that law was taught to them by the prophets there. B'matnita Tana, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer. There's another baraita similar to this one, but a little bit different, in the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and he says also, Shelosha Nevim alu imahim min haGolah. There were 3 prophets that came from Bavel back to Eretz Yisrael. One of them prophesied the size and the place of the Mizbeach. So that's 2 in 1. So now we're going to have an extra thing that we can learn here. And the second one taught that they can give sacrifices even though there's no Bet HaMikdash yet. And the third one testified that they can write the Sefer Torah in Ketav Ashurit. Ketav Ashurit is the font that we have now. That's this font that we're looking at now, and more precisely, the font that we write in the Sefer Torah nowadays. However, in the times of the first Bet HaMikdash, they used Ketav Ivri. In fact, we find still today, anything that you find from the time of the first Bet HaMikdash, whether it be coins or some inscriptions, are all written in Ketav Ivri. Even coins later on during the Chashmonaim they also use Ketav Ivri to reflect that they want to regain the glory of the kings of the first Bet HaMikdash. So it was used here and there later on, but the whole world, this font, this alphabet, was used not only for Hebrew and also Aramaic, but also Moabite and other related languages. Even eventually Latin and Greek are based on the same alphabet, but they're in Latin and Greek and in modern languages, the letters change shape significantly. And so many people were using this. Aramaic especially was a language that was used by Jews and non-Jews all around the Middle East. And the whole world which was updating the font. It's the same exact letters, same number of letters, same pronunciation, everything's the same. It's really just a different font. And the whole world was updating the font, and therefore this is a big deal to update the font of a Sefer Torah. Can you do that? Well, the answer is yes, because the Nevi'im at that time authorized it, and Ezra HaSofer is the one that actually made that shift. Tenor Rabbanan, Keren vekebesh visod veribua me'akevin, Midat orko, midat rochbo, midat komato, and me'akevin. Now, there are certain things that are absolutely required regarding the building of the Mizbeach, and that is the horns, the 4 horns on top, and you have to have a ramp. The Torah actually does not say that you have to have a ramp. However, it does say that you cannot have steps. Well, you're going to have to get up there somehow, and you can't use steps. So therefore, it makes sense you're going to have a ramp. So indirectly, we learn that you have to have a ramp, and also you have to have the base, and 1 amah base on the bottom, and ribua, and it has to be exactly square. We're going to show how we know all these things. If you're missing one of these elements, then the mizbech is not kosher. However, the size of its length and its width and its height, that is not me'akev. If you make it bigger, smaller, whatever, as you wish. And as we saw, that there were different sizes. Each of the Mishkan of Moshe was a different size than the one of Shlomo, and then they made it bigger in the second Bet HaMikdash. So there were all kinds of different sizes. Those are all valid as long as it's square and it has all these other elements. What's the source? You have to look, any pasuk that says hamizbeach next to one of these things, like it says ribua hamizbeach. So it says hamizbeach next to the fact that it has to be square. So that's how we know that that is absolutely necessary. In this note here, they cite all of the other sources as well. It talks about the corners of the mizbeach and in the base of the mizbeach. And here's about the ramp also, that it's in front we talk about lifneh, ha-mizbeach, so it has a front. The front would be the entrance, and so it has to be an entrance way, how do you enter in, with a ramp. And so in all the places where it says ha-mizbeach, then that's me'akev. But regarding the size, it does not say hamizbeach, and therefore one can make it bigger and smaller. Ela me'ata kiyur leRabbi v'sovev leRabbi Yosef b'Rabbi Yehuda hachina med me'akev dichtiv v'natata ota tachat karkov hamizbeach milemata. Pasuk in Shemot says that you shall put it under the karkob of the altar beneath. The context of this pasuk is from here, when it's talking about the building of the Mizbeach. It says, "Vasito mechbar ma'aser eshet nechoshet." You have to make a grate, a network of brass, and upon the net you should make 4 brazen rings of its 4 corners. So those are the rings that you're going to put the poles through in order to carry the Mizbeach. And then this is the one thing that we're interested in. We put this band and these rings under the karkob, which is some kind of ledge, milimata. You put it under it, and that will go up to half of it, and then you put the poles in there. So the question is a karkob. What is a karkob? And so we're going to see a braita, then I'll go back to this. V'tanya, ezeu karkob. What is a karkob? 2 opinions. Rabbi Omer, ze kiyur. Rabbi Yonasi says it's an engraving. It's some kind of decoration engraved on the in a band around the middle of the Mizbeach. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda Omer zeh hasobeb. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda says no, it's not engraved, but rather this is a ledge, just like you have in the permanent Mizbeach. You have a ledge, 1 amah wide, that the Kohen can walk on when he needs to put blood on the top corners. So to here, we had a ledge. It could be Rabbi Yehuda Nasi also agrees that there is a ledge, but he also thinks that it is engraved, and Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda does not think it's engraved. So this is some kind of engravement / ledge, and so that's what we see here also. The question is, this kiyur, according to Rabbi, or just the sobeb, according to Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, is that also absolutely required, indispensable, since it says in the pasuk, karkob ha-mizbeach. So it says the word ha-mizbeach. According to your rule, Rav Huna, anytime it says ha-mizbeach, that means that item is me'akev. So do you have to have that? And if you don't have this karkob, then the mizbeach is invalid, and we answer in. Indeed, that is so. Tanya, oto hayom nifkema keren mizbeach, ve'biu bul shel melach ustamuhu, ve'lo mipnei shekashe la'avoda, el shelo yera'eh mizbeach pagum. And we learned it from actually the end of this baraita, but first we need the story. It says, on that day, which day? This is a day that was on Sukkot, when the Hasmonean king and Kohen Gadol, Alexander Yanai, he was the Kohen Gadol. He also was the king, which is problematic in and of itself. But besides taking both roles of king and Kohen Gadol, also he was a Sadoki, but he's in charge. And so he comes and he's performing the services on Sukkot. On Sukkot, the rabbis / Pharisees are the predecessors of the rabbis. They say that we have to do nisuch hamayim. They go and get water, and you pour the water on the mizbeach. It does not say this explicitly in the Torah. Therefore, the Sadducees deny this ritual. And so, Alexander Yanai, as Kohen Gadol, had this bucket of water that he's supposed to put on the Mizbeach. And instead, it says in Masechet Sukkah, this story is also found in Josephus, that he takes the water and he pours it on his feet, pours it on the floor, not on the Mizbeach. He refuses to do it. Now, the people there, most of them are in fact Pharisees, and they are really upset that the Kohen Gadol is skipping this essential rite. And so they express their anger by pelting the Kohen Gadol with their etrogim. Everybody's holding an etrog. It makes a good projectile object, and they pelted him. This led to terrible disaster. It led to Alexander Yanai crucifying 800 Pharisees and a civil war in which many, many thousands of people were killed. So this is a terrible thing. Alexander Yanai, a very evil person. Another consequence of throwing all these etrogim is that some of them hit the horn of the Mizbeach, and dented it, knocked a piece of it off. And now it doesn't have the corner. And we just said that the keren is me'akev. Now what did they do? They brought a bunch of salt, a fistful of salt, and they sealed it up. That damaged area, they sealed it with salt. So it would look nicer. Now that doesn't make it kosher for avodah, because it has to be made out of stone. You can't make it out of salt. But they just did it as a temporary patch, so it wouldn't look like it's damaged. It wasn't respectful. So they put that temporary patch on it. Now, in the meantime, they wouldn't be able to have korbanot until they came and did a proper fix. Shekol mizbeach she'eno keren v'kebesh v'yisod v'yidbuah pasul. And the Braita continues and says what we said before, that any mizbeach that does not have a horn and a ramp and a base and a square is no good. And here's the key line for us. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Af hasober. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda says it also has to have a ledge surrounding it. So that's it. That ledge is the karkob. We called it a ledge in the second Bet HaMikdash, and in the Torah it calls it a karkob. And so there you go. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda says, yes, in fact, the sobeb is absolutely required, and this fits with the rule of Rav Huna that you have to have anything that has the word hamizbeach is absolutely necessary. We continue with further discussion of this item, the karkob. Tenor banan, ezeu karkob, ben keren lekeren, makom hiluch reglei kohanim amma. We seem to have a different definition of a karkob here. What's a karkob? Between the horns, each horn, there was a place of walking so that the kohanim can walk on top of the mizbeach. You could see the picture here. That you have the horns, and then if you wanted to walk, you could walk between the horns. So there was a 1 amma wide walkway. Now this is a problem because you're not going to be able to actually walk all around, and so because you're going to bump into the horn. So the Gemara is about to say is actually you need another amma. So this is not sufficient. It's also kind of dangerous. It's very near the edge, and so there was another amma over here. That's why we mentioned earlier that the actual place, according to this depiction of Rabbi Yosef, the actual place where you can burn is only 1 amma wide, where the fire is. So right now we're saying the karkob is up here, but you can see that the opinion that we were just discussing, and Torah definitely seems to be talking about this, is that it's around in the middle. There is a karkob band surrounding it / ledge. Okay, so what is a karkob? So far, this is where the kohanim are going to walk on top. We ask, Atu ha-kohanim ben keren lekeren havu azleh? Wait, can they walk from corner to corner? They can't even walk there. Ela ema mekom umekom hiluch reglei kohanim amma. Oh, we're actually talking about two places. We're talking about the area between one horn to the next, and also another amma further in, where so that they can walk all around. That's the karkob. We ask about that. Torah Pasuk says that the karkob is underneath where they made this brass lattice and where the poles were inserted, where the rings are. So that means it's in the middle of the side of the mizbeach, not on top. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, terehavu chad lenoi bechad hakohanim dela nishtarku. And so we answer that in fact there are two things called karkob. One is for decoration. That's the one all around the side. According to the B, it was engraved. So that would be something beautiful, some kind of lattice work. And the other is for the kohanim on top, so that they wouldn't slip off the top of the altar. It would be hard to walk just in that small area between the horns, and so they had a walkway a little bit further in, and that was also called a karkob. Midat orko, midat rochbo, midat komato, and me'akevin. Now the Braita taught that the length and the height and the width are not me'akev. You can make it bigger and smaller. Amar Bimaneh bilbad shelo yivchatenu mimizbeach she'asa Moshe. Bimaneh says, yeah, you can make it as big and small as you want, as long as it's not smaller than the mizbeach that Moshe made. Bechama, how big is that? Amar Rav Yosef, amma. Rav Yosef, in his old age, forgot some of his studies. Now, he said, amma, 1 amma. And then the people that were there listening, mechaku aleh, they laughed at him. What do you mean 1 amma? We know the pasuk, 5 amot orech ve5 amot rochab rabua hiyeh hamizbech. It says that it's 5 by 5. And so, it was kind of disrespectful to the sage that he forgot some of his learning when he was older, and they're laughing at him because they know a pasuk. Abaye was there, and he asked Rav Yosef in a good polite way. He says, oh, perhaps when you said 1 amma square, what you mean is that the placement of the arrangement of wood in the middle, that is 1 amah. That means the size of it. As we said here, indeed, it's 5 by 5, but the place where you could put wood is 1 amah in the middle, and that's what you were referring to. Amar le mor de Gabra Rabba hu yada maika amina. And Rav Yosef said, the master is a great man because he knows what I meant to say. He's the only one that thought about it and took my words seriously. Oh, he must, is a great, Rav Yosef, great sage. He must know what he's talking about. Oh, I figured it out. He's talking about only the area in the middle where there's a fire. And he says, Rav Yosef, indeed, that's what I was talking about. And he was not, and the people that were mocking him were really very disrespectful, not even thinking clearly and deeply about what he meant. Kareh alayhu, and Rav Yosef applied to the other people who were laughing at him. He applied the pasuk bnei keturah. He called them the children of keturah. In other words, Abaye and the proper students there, bnei Avraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, they have proper line, and these others, they're the children of keturah. Only it's a real insult to be like, these are the other children, not the chosen ones. Another story regarding using Bnei Keturah as an insult. You had the nephews of Rabbi Tarfon who were sitting in front of Rabbi Tarfon learning. Petach ve'amar vayosef Abraham vayikach isha u'shma Yochani. Parashat HaShabbat. Coincidence, this is now, we're going to read this now, in Chayei Sarah. And so Rabbi Tarfon started off his lecture, and he said, then Abraham took another wife, and her name was Yohani. Now all the students cried out, Amri le keturah keti. What do you mean, Rabbi? It says keturah. Why are you saying Yohani was her name? Kari alehem bnei keturah. And so he made fun of them. He says, you are the children of keturah. Meaning, that's all you know. You know a pasuk. You know how to quote a pasuk. Everybody knows a pasuk. And you're making it like, oh yes, we're learned people. Now go learn more than that. And so he was purposefully using a wrong name, the fake name, Yochani, in order to be able to rebuke them. It says, okay, Chazak Baruch, you know a basic pasuk in Bereshit. Okay, now you should go on your learning and figure out more sophisticated matters. Amar Abaye, Bar Huna, Amar Rav Chama Bar Guria, Gizirin Shasa Moshe Urkan Amma V'Rochban Amma, V'Obian Kemachak Godesh Se'ah. Abaye, the son of Huna, said in the name of Rav Chama, the son of Guria, that the wooden logs that Moshe made to put on the Mizbeach were 1 amah long and 1 amah wide, and their thickness was like a leveler. When you have grain and you put the grain in a barrel and you want to level it off, so you use a flat stick. So they were thin, but they were 1 amah wide and long. The point is that you can put it on that spot on the Mizbeach precisely. So if it's there, and then you light that on fire and put everything on there. So they made logs that would fit precisely. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah says, no, not a regular amah, but rather a shortened amah. There were different kinds of amot, different types of measurements they're all called amah, but one was considered a little longer and one's a little shorter. He used the shorter one. Amar Rav Yosef, v'lav hainu detana al ha'asim asher al ha'esh asher al ha'mizbeach shelo yu asim yosin min ha'mizbeach kelum. And this is a fulfillment of the pasuk. Rav Yosef says that, as we learn it in a Braita, the pasuk says, upon the wood that is on the fire, that is on the altar. And that teaches us that the firewood should not go out of the Mizbeach at all. You shouldn't put so much firewood or long beams. If you put long beams and they go past, they're hanging over the side, that's not proper. Rather, the wood should be confined only to the place where you are going to burn. Don't put it over here. It's also, they have to walk there, they're going to trip. And therefore, he made sure to use wood that was only an amah long, and even that amah was made of the short amot that had only 5 tefachim rather than 6 tefachim. And so that way, it would surely not go over the edge. And so that's another halakha that we learn about even the wood that's placed on top of the Mizbeach. Tenan Hatam. Now we cite a Mishnah in Masechet Midot that teaches Kevesh haya lidroma shel Mizbeach Orech sheloshim u'shtayim al rochav shesh esre mina hanemile. The ramp was to the south of the Mizbeach, and it was 32 amot long and 16 amot wide. What is the source that the ramp is on the south? It doesn't say in the Torah which way it is. It doesn't even say that there's a ramp. So how do we know that it should be in the south? Amar Rav Huna, Amar Kera, v'shachat oto al yerech hamizbeach safona, shehe yerech basafon ufanav badarom. Rav Huna explains because Pasuk says regarding korban olah that one slaughters it on the side of the mizbeach to the north. So that means that the north side of the Mizbeach is called Yarech. We're going to compare this to the anatomy of a human body. Yarech, which means thigh, just to take that to mean legs, is on one side. If a person is lying down and his legs are in one direction, then his head will be in the other direction, or a face. And so we're considering the ramp to be an entrance, and the entrance is lifneh, panim. So therefore, that will be in opposite directions. Sheyarech basafon ufanav badarom. If someone was lying down with his legs pointing to the north, then his head would be pointing to the south. That's Rav Huna's derivation. But we ask about that. Ema yarech basafon ufanav basafon. How do you know? Maybe if a person is sitting down, then his thighs are facing north and his face is also facing north. So maybe it's about someone sitting down. Amar Rava, Rame Gavra Pe. Rava says, no, put the person on his face, meaning lie him down, and compare it to a person who's lying down. Amar Labaye Adraba, Taris Veoteb Gavra. Abaye says, no, opposite. Sit him straight up. Let him be sitting up. And then his legs and his face are facing the same way. Amar Le, Rava said, Rabua Ketiv. We're going to take the word Rabua as if it's written Rabutz. Rabutz means crouching or lying down. So Rava says, since the Pasuk says regarding the Mizbech, it should be Rabua, that means, that's like it says Rabutz, similar letters. You could just change one letter, Ayin to Sadi. There is a concept of two-letter roots, so maybe it's related to that. Abaye says, no, you can't take Rabua and make it into Rabutz because we need the word Rabua to teach that it is in fact square. So you have to leave it like that. It doesn't mean anything else. And then Rava answers, Miketi Meruba. Does it say Meruba? Then that would mean square. But it doesn't say it as Meruba. It says Rabua to teach us that you have to be lying down. So Abaye says, Miketi Rebutz. Well, it doesn't say Rabutz either. So it's true, it doesn't say Meruba, but it doesn't say Rabutz. If it was trying to teach you that it should be like lying down, then why not just write Rabutz? Rava explains, Amarle Rabua Ketiv, de Mashmachi, Mashmachi. That's why it's written Rabua, so that it can teach you two things. It's written Rabua and not Rabutz, so that you know it has to be square. And it's written Rabua and not Meruba to teach me that it's like someone lying down. And so the fact that it uses this form rather than the other forms that would be clearer, that just means square or just means lying down, but using an in-between form, that means it's teaching us both of these things. And so that's that's a proof that it's like someone lying down, and therefore the face of it is in the south. That's the ramp. There's another Tana that has a different derivation, that the ramp is on the south. The Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Uma'alotehu penot kadim. Kol penot she'ata poneh, lo yu ela derech yamin lamizrach. It says in the description of the Bet HaMikdash in Yechezkel that the steps shall look, penot, face, towards the east. Now, what does that mean? How can you face towards the east when you turn? Penot also means to turn. So when you turn, you're going to turn towards the east. That means that any time you turn, it should always be, called penot, any turns that you turn, it should always be towards the right. And that will be also towards the east. Okay, so how does that work? Well, it works perfectly. If you walk up the ramp from the south, so you're walking facing north. Now, you're going to turn right. If you turn right, while you're facing north, then you're going to be facing east. That's perfect. That's exactly what it says. That uma'alotehu, you go up the ramp, and then pinot, you turn, and you always turn right. in the Bet HaMikdash, and then you turn right and you're facing east. We learn from here that whenever somebody would walk around the Makom HaMikdash, the Har HaBayit, one always goes counterclockwise. That's because of this rule. When you go up, let's say you enter into one of the gates of Har HaBayit, so now you're facing to the middle of Har HaBayit, you turn right. When you turn right, then you're going to start walking, and that'll be counterclockwise. Now, even though that will involve turning left, four times and then exiting, but the point is that the first turn that you make when you enter should be towards the right, and that would only work if it would only be east if the ramp is on the south. Now, how do you know? Maybe you're going up the ramp from the north, and then you make a left, and then you'll be facing east. So but I understand that you have to be facing east when you turn, but you could do that if you come from the north, if the ramp was on the north, and you made a left. So how do you know that? You always have to make a right. And the answer is Tani Rami bar Chizkiya Yam she'asa Shelomo Omed al shenem asar bakar shelosha ponim safono shlosha ponim yama shlosha ponim negba shlosha ponim mizracha kol yimpinot she'ata poneh lo yihu ela derech yamin la mizrach. Rami bar Yechizkiya taught in a baraita that this big sea, meaning it's a big pool, a giant basin that Shlomo built, the pool itself was this giant round pool, and it was resting upon statues of 12 cattle. It's interesting that he put 12 cattle in as statues in the Bet HaMikdash, but in any case, this was decorative, and there were 3 of them that were facing north, and 3 facing Yama is west, and 3 facing south, and 3 facing east. So what you see here is starting north and then going counterclockwise. So we see from the order of the directions here, and this is north and then west and then south and then east, that you're going counterclockwise. If you're going counterclockwise, that means that as when you first enter into Har HaBayit, you're going to turn right and then go around. Same thing with the Mizbeach. When you go onto the Mizbeach, you have to turn right and then go counterclockwise. And so from here we learn that you always have to turn right, the first turn that you make, and that would only work, you have to face east in the first turn. That would only work if the ramp is in the south. And we challenge this. Don't we need these Pesukim for the description of this vessel itself? You have to describe the vessel and how these cows are facing, and oxen are facing different directions. Imken ponim lamali. Yeah, but why do you have to say ponim? Just say shelosha yama. Ponim means to turn. So we learn from the fact that it keeps saying ponim, that is actually teaching us about in which direction one should turn. Shal Rabbi Shimon ben Yoseh ben Lakonya et Rabbi Yoseh. So this Rabbi Shimon, he happens to be the son of Yoseh, the son of Lakonya. He's asking Rabbi Yoseh. Omer ya Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai avir yesh ba kebesh lamizbeach. The names are all confusing because there's 2 Rabbi Shimons. And this one Rabbi Shimon is the son of Yoseh. Well, let's get them straight. This Rabbi Shimon is asking Rabbi Yoseh about Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. So Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai and Rabbi Yoseh agree on one thing, and this Rabbi Shimon ben Yoseh is challenging it and wondering if it's true. So he asked, is it true that Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai said that there is some airspace between the ramp and the Mizbeach? Let's look at a picture first, and there's different ways of describing this. But for example, here, you can see that here is the ramp, and it's 30 long, but then another 30, and it's supposed to be 32. The extra 2 is that it overlaps the base and overlaps the Sovev ledge. But when you say overlaps, it doesn't touch it. There's a little bit of airspace here, vertically, horizontally, and vertically, so it's not actually touching it. The point is that the Mizbeach should be its own complete unit, totally square. If you would attach it, then now the Mizbeach is not a perfect shape anymore. It's not square. So it has to be separated. You can separate it as another depiction to separate it, that the edge goes straight up. And that would be some space over here, 1 amma space. So to get on there, you'd actually have to jump over here, mind the gap. So that here would be a relatively bigger space, over here a tiny space, but the point is that it's not physically attached, there is a little bit of space. And so that's what Rabbi Shimon is asking Rabbi Yoseh. Is it true that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says that there is space, airspace, between the ramp and the Mizbeach? And Rabbi Yoseh answers, Amar lo ve'ata iyata omer ken, and do you not think so? Of course there is. V'alo kevar ne'emar ve'asita olotecha habasar ve'hadam. Madam bizrika, af basar bizrika. Pasuk says regarding a korban olah that you will offer the burnt offering, the flesh and the blood. It's comparing the two together. We already know that blood of a korban olah is not dabbed with a finger, but rather is thrown from the basin, and you throw it onto the side of the mizbeach. So just like the blood is thrown, so too the flesh is thrown. Now why would you throw it? Oh, it must mean that there is a gap and you have to throw it over the gap. There's some kind of obstacle that's preventing the kohen, from putting it directly on the fire, and that's why he has to throw it. And so this is a source that there has to be a gap. Amar lo, shani omed besad ha'malacha vezorek. Rabbi Shimon ben Yoseh, who asked the question, said, I disagree. There doesn't have to be a gap just in order to throw it. It just says there's a law that you have to throw it. So that means that you can walk right up to the fire and near it and throw it on. It doesn't mean you have to be standing all the way behind the ramp because there's a gap there. It means that the law of throwing is not a proof that there's a gap. You can throw from the side of the wood. Amar lo, כשהוא זורק למערכה דלוקה הוא זורק, או למערכה שאינה דלוקה הוא זורק, הווה אומר למערכה דלוקה הוא זורק. הטעם משום דלא אפשר. Rabbi Yosef responds and says, no, he's not throwing it onto it just because it's very hot, because you wouldn't need a pasuk to tell me that. It's kind of obvious. If something's so hot, obviously you're going to toss it on and not place it on directly. And that's what he says here. When he throws it on, is he throwing it onto a pile of fire that's lit or a pile of fire that's not lit? Obviously, it's lit already. You make sure that the fire is nice and hot and burning, and then you throw it on. And so, if that's the reason that you said, well, then it's impossible not to throw it on. You have to put it up. You have to throw it because it's too hot to put on directly. So you wouldn't need the pasuk to tell me that if it was just for practical reasons that you're throwing it right just from the side. Rather, when the pasuk says you're throwing it like the blood, you have to throw it on. It must be teaching us something else, something extra, which is that there is a gap, and that gap is preventing you from getting close by, and that's why you have to throw it on, and that teaches us that there has to be a gap. Rapapa amar ki dam, ma dam avir karka mafsiko, af basar avir karka mafsiko. Rapapa has a different derivation, similar, but he adds to it that the flesh has to be like the blood. Just like when you throw the blood, there is the airspace above the ground that is interposing. So the kohen will stand a little bit away from the mizbeach, throw it. While it's in the airspace, it's above the ground, and then finally it lands on the side of the mizbeach. So too, when putting the flesh on, there should be that there is airspace that goes all the way down to the ground. Well, that couldn't be if you're on top of the mizbeach already, and even if you throw it, it's only going on the airspace that's on top of the mizbeach. Rather, there has to be a gap, and this would have to be somewhat of a bigger gap, that the gap goes down to the floor, and so that when you throw it, it will go over airspace that's over the floor. So that's Rapapa's proof that the ramp is not physically connected. There has to be some airspace in between. אמר רב יהודה, שני חבשים קטנים יוצאים מן הכבש, שבהם פונים ליסוד ולסובב. Rav Yehuda teaches that in addition to the main ramp that went from the floor up to the top level of the Mizbeach, there were also two smaller ramps. One of them goes to the yesod. That's the one down here that will go down to the base where there were holes in order to pour the remnants. And so it would go down here, and that's going to be on that side. And then there is another one that has to go to the sovev, to the ledge, and that would be over here. So you start walking up the ramp a little, and then you can go to that, and those are the two minor ramps. In addition, he teaches that muvdalim min hamizbeach melo nimash mishum shenemar saviv. All the ramps are separated a little bit, even one hairbreadth from the Mizbeach, even though this looks like it's touching, has to be a hairbreadth separated from the main part of the Mizbeach, because the Pasuk says Saviv. Saviv means that the Mizbeach itself has to be totally open all the way around with nothing attached to it. So therefore, there can't be anything attached because it has to be roundabout. Rabbi Abu says another law, another derivation of that same law is a square. It has to be perfectly square. If you attach things sticking out, then it won't be square. Why do I need both of these words, Saviv and Rabua, if they're teaching the same thing? I need them both. If it said Saviv, then I might have thought that the Mizbeach can be round. So therefore, it has to say Rabua. If it said Rabua, that really means rectangle. I might have thought that just has to be straight sides, but maybe it could be long and narrow, as long as it's a rectangle and not anything sticking out. Therefore, it says Saviv. Saviv is like, meaning Saviv means equal on all sides. So it has to be an equilateral triangle that's where the sides are all equal, and so that would be a square. Tenan hatam hakebesh v'hamizbeach shishim ushetayim. Mishnah Midot says that if you add up the ramp and the mizbeach, you get 62 altogether from the tip of the ramp all the way till the other side of the mizbeach. Wait a second, 62, it should be 64, because we said that the ramp is 32 and the mizbeach is 32. That should be 64. Nimsa Poreach amma al yesod ve'amma al sobeb. No, what happens is there's an overlap. There's an overlap on top of the base and also on top of the ledge, and so those two are counted double, and so you end up having just 62. אמר רמי בר חמא, כל כבשי כבשים 3 אמות לאמה, חוץ מכבשו של מזבח שהיה 3 אמות ומכסה ואצבע ושליש אצבע בזכרותה. Rabbi bar Chama says all of the ramps were a ratio of 3 amot to 1 amma. In other words, 3 amot of a run would be 1 amma high. So that would be if you made a triangle, it would be a height of 1, and the base would be 3. And so all of the other ramps that are all around in the Bet HaMikdash would have this ratio and this particular slope, except for the main ramp of the Mizbeach, because there you could see that it's 9 amot high, not 10, because it doesn't have to go up to the top of the keranot, just to the top of the Mizbeach itself, the flat part. So that's 9 amot high, and the run is 32. So we see that if it was 1 by 3, then this would be 27, but instead it's 32. So that means it's you have a longer run, and that means the slope is shorter, is less of a slope, easier to walk up. And so because this is such a long ramp, we want to make it easier for the Kohanim. That has to be used a lot. So this was a smaller slope. Now, if you do the math here, you could get the length of this by Pythagorean theorem, and here also you could do the same. And if we calculate it, it says here that the ratio, we know it's 9 to 32, and if you do that math, you'll end up that for every 1 rise, you'll have 3.5 amot plus 1 finger breadth plus 1/3 of a finger breadth measured by the tip. And here is the exact math here. It's 3.55 amot on this side, which is exactly what the Gemara said, 3.5 amot plus 1/3 plus these 24, plus 1 1/3 espaot. 1 amma is equal to 24 espaot. So it's good that we learn geometry so that we can understand this Gemara. You see, everything is in the Gemara. Hafoch ba v'afoch ba de kula ba. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen.